This is Lady B, and today is about dry shampoo. I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of it, as well as show you how to use a natural version that doesn't have any of the chemicals and additives that the stuff you find in the store will have. Now, it has been 16 days since the last time I washed my hair. And you can see, this is the braid I put it up in for sleeping. You can see that it is starting to show it. It's looking a little greasy. So I'll be using dry shampoo, which will extend my hair for a couple more days before I have to wash it. So the things that you need to use a dry shampoo is, the first thing you have to do is you have to detangle your hair completely before you put any of it in. And for that you need some type of natural comb or brush. I have here a wood brush. It's not varnished, it's just raw wood. I have had it for a very long time. It's a bit of a, not as wide a tooth as perhaps most people would use. You can tell how long I've had it by the fact that the teeth on the bottom there are curving. That's from use. This was straight when I bought it. This is a horn comb. It's just 100% natural horn. You actually have to keep these things oiled so that they don't dry out and crack, but they're very good for moving oils in your hair. And this is a boar bristle brush with the detangling bristles. You can kind of see them. This is by Belula. And the comb is from Man in Maine. It's actually for men to comb their beards with, but it works for us ladies too. With the detangling brush, do not use this to detangle your hair. These detangling bristles are not intended to be used for that purpose. The reason you buy a mixed detangling and boar bristle brush is because the bristles will push through the hair, allowing you to brush your hair, if you have thick hair, much faster, rather than having to take your hair in small sections and brush each individual section. So it's just a convenience thing for those of us with thick hair. Don't detangle with this. Instead, you're going to detangle starting with a wider comb and going to a finer comb. All right, so while I'm doing that, I want to talk a little bit about the history. Oh, and one other thing, you will notice that I'm actually starting at the top. When you have really long hair and you want to keep that really long hair, you do not actually start at the bottom. The first thing you do is you push it past your scalp to where you can actually hold the hair and then start at the bottom, because we don't want any tugging on the scalp, because that can help minimize any hair loss. Any tugging on the scalp can cause hair loss. So we try to avoid any tugging or anything that will cause that. So instead, I start at the top and then go to the bottom and then work my way up. Like that. Okay, so the history of it. Now, I can't speak for pre-Victorian time, but in the Victorian times, the dry shampoo was just that, a shampoo. It was a way of cleaning your hair. It was not left in. You might leave it in for a couple hours or even overnight if need be, but it was brushed out. The point of a dry shampoo in the Victorian era was literally to clean excess sebum from your hair. Now, I have discovered, as I have gotten longer and longer hair, that the longer my hair is, the longer I can go between washing. And in the Victorian times, it was believed that you were best off going as long as possible. And for most advices on it, it was no more than once a week, but they would recommend up to 2 weeks to 3 weeks to a month if possible. And this process they used could add an entire week or even two, depending on the type of hair you had, to how long you could go between washes. For those with shorter hair who couldn't do it that long, because there was times in Victorian times when short haircuts were in fashion. They never lasted, but there were times. Even then, they told them don't wash more than 3 times a week, which is good advice. Better advice is don't wash more than once a week. But when you have really short hair, sometimes that is not an option. So they would use this dry shampoo method as a way of cleaning their hair. Now, what they did is they would take starchy powders. Things like, let's see, I have a list here. Let's see, cornmeal, ground oats, and wheat bran were very common. They also used talc, which was the same thing they powdered their hair with for their wigs. And they used something called orris root powder, which is another fine powder just like the talc, but smells like violets. So added a natural scent to it. And I ran across several recipes that were the more coarse powders, the cornmeal and the oatmeal, that would add orris root powder to the mix for that scent, which I thought is a really nice way of doing it, rather than adding essential oils, which can be irritating to the scalp if you add them in. So that's something that if you make your own, you have to consider before you add natural essential oils into it for scent, is if you have sensitive skin, you may not want to do that. So orris root powder was an option that they could use that would not do that. Now, when we talk about cornmeal and oatmeal, we are not talking about cornstarch. We're talking about a thicker, heavier grain. And you can see here, this is actually some oatmeal or ground oats, and it is very powdery, but you can see that it is not a really, really, really fine powder, not like this one. This is tapioca starch, and it is incredibly fine. It sticks to everything. This is more like what you would get with the talc or the orris root powder. Your cornmeal or your oatmeal would be a coarser grain. And of course, the finer the grain, the more expensive it was. So those who had more money could afford the finer powders. So how they did it, which is not the same as what we do today, but how they did it is they would powder their hair or their scalp. The key to dry shampoo is you put the powder where the oil is. If you do boar bristle brushing and you do it correctly, you will not have oil on your scalp. In fact, I brush twice a day with the boar bristle, and I have to add oil to my scalp before washing it because my scalp actually gets really dry. It pulls the oils away so successfully that if I'm using a traditional shampoo, then I have to add oils to my scalp, or the traditional shampoo will completely dry out my scalp to the point where it can actually be quite painful. This is one of the reasons I prefer the egg wash shampoo, but there is a convenience factor with the bar shampoos, which is what I use when I'm not doing the egg wash. There we go. Now you can see how when I finished with that one, I switched to this comb. And also now that I'm combing it, it's easier for you to see just how oily it is. So, and now that I've combed through it, I'm going to finish up with my brush. Let's see, where was I? You would apply it to where the oil is, which basically meant if you were using a finer powder, you only put it on your hair. You did not put it on your scalp. And there's a good reason for that I will cover later. if you were using one of the more coarse being relative, of course, but one of the more coarse meals, you would actually scrub it into both your scalp and your hair with your hands, massage it into your hair, and do your best to get it to soak up. The point of it was to absorb the oils in your hair. And if this is where you could leave it on for a couple hours or overnight comes in, if necessary, if you don't have the really fine powder that absorbs incredibly quickly, or you have extremely greasy hair, you might want to leave it on for longer just to give those materials more time to absorb that. Then, after it had had time to absorb, you would remove it. Now, this was a really, really messy process. All the books and references I found have said to either do it over a tub or outside, because the whole point was to then get all of the starch, all of the powder, as much as possible out of your hair. Now, you would not be able to get all of it out of your hair. There would still be some, and if your hair is really thin, it could show, which this is a process that was still being used post World War II, when people had shorter hair and they were washing their hair once a week. And some people, if you have an oilier scalp, you couldn't make it the full week with the shorter hairstyles, and they would still use this process. My mother was from that time period, and she hated it. She had thin hair, and she could never get it to work for her. It always showed on her scalp, and she hated it, which is one of the reasons why when these newer shampoos came out that would allow you to wash more often, that were gentler than the natural shampoos that had been used before then, they were so popular because they worked well with the short hairstyles. But still not very good for your hair, especially these days, which is why I recommend all natural. Anyway, you would try to remove it. If you'd used a really, really light powder, you could just shake it out over a tub or something. And the lighter the powder, the more careful you were not to get it on your scalp. Again, I'll cover that in a minute. The heavier ones could be brushed out, not just shook out. You could use a brush. Even with the lighter powders, you can use a brush to get it out. But if you do use a brush, you want 2 brushes, because the stuff works, the powder works by coating the oils on your hair. And the brush works by removing anything on your hair. It's literally cleaning your hair as you brush with it. And it also moves the oils and sebum from the top of your hair down your hair, conditioning it, making it healthier, softer, and everything else. Well, just as the powders will coat the oils in your hair, will also coat the oils on your brush. And the process of brushing it out not only makes a huge mess, it makes a mess of your brush. You will have to wash it after you have done so. And you may have to for a couple days. I've actually used this style of cleaning before, where I put it on everywhere on my hair where it was clean, and then I was brushing it out. I was brushing it out for days, and it was, such a mess. I can't even. So do not use your standard hair brushing, smoothing brush to brush out the powder, because it will make a mess of it. You will have to wash it, and these brushes can take up to 24 hours to dry. So what do we actually do? Now, like I keep mentioning, the way we do it now is not the same as how they did it in the Victorian time. What we do now is actually what the Victorian hairdressers did. When the Victorian hairdressers had a customer come in whose hair was too oily to style properly, they would use this technique, which is to take a really lightweight powder and powder it just on the hair, just enough to absorb enough of the oil that they could then style it. And this is not supposed to be left in. Like I said, they were not supposed to be left in. And the dermatologist I looked up that talked about this agree. You should not use a dry shampoo for more than 2 days. Because if you have this really fine powder and it settles on your scalp for more than a couple days, then it can cause occlusion of the follicles. It can cause irritation, it can cause acne, it can cause dandruff. So this is not something you want to leave on your scalp. In spite of that, they will tell you to put it on your scalp. That is because most people do not do the boar bristle brushing, and that is where the oil is. You put it where the oil is. So I'm going to show you how to do it. You can see how I have, and you watched me thoroughly comb and brush my hair. So for the powder, for a natural powder, you can use any really fine powder. You can use cornstarch, you can use tapioca starch, you can use arrowroot, you can use potato starch. If you want to tint it so it's close to the color in your hair, because all of those are very, very white, you can tint them with activated charcoal, with cocoa powder, of all things, or you can even use cinnamon, say for those redheads. And so you can tint it. Do not make it so that it's like a bright, vivid tint color. You just want to tint it so that it looks brownish, reddish, grayish. And you're going to want to put them in a container that will let you use. Now, this is what I have made. This is arrowroot and cocoa powder. I used a Dutch cocoa. I'm not sure why Dutch, but I used a Dutch cocoa. And you need either a large fluffy brush, or you need to put this in like a salt shaker or something that will let you sprinkle it. Because what you're going to do, and I cannot emphasize this enough, less is more. Only use as much as you have to. So what you're going to do is you're going to dip your brush in your powder, take off most of it, just like when you're using makeup, and then you're going to just shake it onto your hair where the oil is. Like I said, I do the boar bristle brushing, so the oil is not on my scalp, it is on my hair. Okay, so I'm putting it on my hair near the roots, but not on my scalp. And it really doesn't take much. There we go. Now I'm going to take my fine comb, and you do need a fine comb if you can get one. It might work with a plastic comb, but I really recommend getting a natural comb. And you're just going to comb it into your hair. I gotta say, the advantage of putting chocolate in this is it smells really good. And my hair is extremely oily, so I'm going to need more of that. Now, if you do boar bristle brushing, like I do, at this point, I cannot emphasize this enough, do not use your boar bristle brush to brush your hair while you have this in it, unless you have a second one. Just as the Victorians used two, you will also want to use two. Because of two reasons. One, this style, it works by being in your hair. You're not actually doing the cleaning method where you literally saturate your hair with it and then get it all out. You're doing the method where you're only adding enough to absorb it so that you can style it, and you're leaving it in. And this makes your hair, it gives it more volume and texture. It also adds texture. It makes it easier to style, believe it or not. That looks right. There. Needs a little bit more here. But I'm going to actually continue to do this by parting my hair and doing another section and so forth until I've done it through my hair. So I will be back after I have done that. Okay, so it is finished, and you can see the difference. I'll put a picture up somewhere around here so you can, of before and after, so you can see the difference. But it has more volume, it has texture, it is fluffier, and now I'm going to put my hair up. And that way you can see how well it styles also. So, now normally to put my hair up at this point, I'd be pulling out my brush. But remember, I've put this in my hair, so for the next 2 days until I wash my hair again, I will not be using my boar bristle brush. Otherwise, I will be brushing out the powder that is absorbing the oil and making it look cleaner. Done. So here it is. And not only does this look clean, but it actually demonstrates the second purpose besides just adding a few extra days before you have to wash your hair, and that is if you need to put your hair up for some reason and you want a little extra hold and you do not want to use a gel or a hairspray, you can put dry shampoo in and it will add extra hold and grip to your styling. I secure my hair very much so when I am styling my hair standardly, and this is even more secure. I could go out dancing all night and not worry about this falling down. So there's a second bonus, something you can try. If you liked this, please like and subscribe, and I will see you next week. Until then, just remember, don't be afraid to try something new, whether it's making your own dry shampoo or anything else, and make whatever it is you do exclusively you. I'll see you next week. Oh, one other thing. Did I mention? I can't remember if I mentioned. that is, if you use a very fine powder, do not put it on your scalp. I might have mentioned that before, don't remember, but now I have. And you're going to, sorry, having this on my face is driving me crazy. Okay.